Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to this tutorial where I'm going to discuss lighting and rendering and basically how to finish off our animation and export a video. So I'll just quickly show you the video I've made. It goes for about 20 seconds. Okay, so the things you'll notice in that animation, it had a soundtrack, it had different camera views, it had changes in lighting, and I tried to tell like a little story. I had these weird whispering sounds in the background and that ticking sound that often represents time or that, maybe some form of anticipation. You can take this a lot further in your work and, maybe you can do some interesting things with these objects with your camera, especially if you've been using objects from your house. You could tell, some really interesting or beautiful stories just with a very simple animation like this. Okay, so first things first, I've added just a couple of extra textures and objects to my environment just because of the camera angles I'm using. So in this camera angle right at the beginning, my camera, if I go into my solid view, it's actually seeing the floor and the wall a little bit further. So all I just made my back wall a lot longer. I was very lazy and I just duplicated the back wall and put it on the ground. And then I actually used my Blender Kit add-on and I just looked for a material called wood panel and I just had a look at what was there and I chose something that I thought kind of fitted my scene. I think it was one of these early ones here and I just applied it to these objects. If we have a look in the shader editor, it's basically a bunch of image textures, also with a normal map that gives it's quite nice. It gives it this it looks like an old manor house. And it looks like a shelf that maybe someone has forgotten about. It's kind of dark. Yeah, I just thought it matched. Okay, the other thing I've done with texturing, if we go back to my animation and we have a look at my rendered view, I might make that a little bit larger and zoom in, is I added this sort of brushed metal texture on my gears here. If I go in a little bit more closely here, I'll just press frame selected, view frame selected if I want to get close to that object. You can see I've got that kind of brushed metal texture on the object, and when it's lit properly, I think it looks kind of nice. It looks like brushed metal, especially when I've added depth of field on the camera, so only a little bit is in focus. I also used a different metal for the shaft here and a different metal for the gears because that's kind of often how these mechanisms look, and it just makes it look a little bit more realistic or kind of old, special, something like that. So let's have a look at these materials. I actually just copied this material from a really nice Blender tutorial I found. I'll show you that in a moment. It's what's called a procedural material. If I go up close, what it's doing is I'll select this gear. It's basically using a noise texture to create a pattern, and then we're just stretching and wrapping that pattern around on the object. So for example, if I mute this gradient texture, you'll see that it's actually just this speckly noise texture that then the gradient is sort of wrapping and spinning, and it's making those streaks, and then we're using the streaks both in the color as well, looks like I turned that off, as well as the normal map, the sort of the bumpiness. So you can see when the normal map's turned on, we get a little bit of bumpiness there. The other thing I've added is I added some clear coat, which is also in the tutorial. It adds that extra layer of shininess as if somebody put some oil or varnish on top, and then I kept the roughness of that quite low. So the tutorial, I'll link that in the description. That was this one from Ryan King Art's fantastic Blender channel. He goes through quite a few different materials for making procedural metal shaders, and I really recommend trying some of these out. They're cool because you don't have to download any textures. You can just use internal generators within Blender to sort of create this illusion. So I think that's pretty cool. Okay, so what else have we got? I think that's all I've added. With his texture, I think on the steel, I just changed the base color. So on the brass, I added, you can copy this hex code if you like, that will give you that exact color, or you can choose whatever color you like. It's just a desaturated sort of goldish color. And then on the other one, it's got a gray. Then all of the other settings are exactly the same. I put some wood texture on the laser cut box. I just had some wood textures in my on my computer, and I've just added exactly like we did the book. I've got a normal map, I've got my my gloss map, and I've got my color map here. You can download textures online, you can play around with YouTube tutorials, add whatever texture you like. And then finally, with the sculpture, I've just made a really simple ceramic procedural texture. You can see how simple it is. I haven't added any other nodes. I've just used settings here. I chose a color that's a very, very pale green. What you can do is you can always choose a color that you like. I just like that sort of blue-green ceramic color. And then you can adjust the saturation, and that'll bring the color picker back towards the white center of the circle. So I did that. I kept the roughness quite low, so it's kind of shiny. I added some subsurface scattering that makes it look a little bit translucent. So without it, it's a bit more flat, but with the subsurface, it means the light is sort of, I'll turn this off, kind of bouncing through it a bit more. And then I also added a clear coat, as if it's got kind of a layer of glossy varnish on top of it. And that, to me, kind of makes it look a little bit like porcelain or some sort of ceramic. It's very easy to do, and I think it looks kind of good. All right, what else have I done? You'll notice that I made some of the flower petals fall off. So I'll show you how to do that. I'll do it to another one here. So looking back at our flowers, at the moment they still have all of their modifiers on them. Most importantly, they have the array modifier. So if I want to treat these flowers as separate, I need to apply the array modifier. So now we have 1, 2, 3 petals. And now if I want to separate them into separate objects, I can press Tab to go into edit mode, A to select all, and then I can right click and I can separate by loose parts. And what that means is now I've got 3 flowers because they're separate objects. For some of my fallen flowers, I increased their modifier strength so they're a bit more rippled, because I thought that might make them look a little bit more dead. So you could do that. If I wanted to make this, or maybe this petal fall down, I could go to its displacement modifier and maybe make this higher, like 0.06, and it'll make it more ripply. What I could also do, I suppose, is I could even change its shader to be a little bit less saturated. So this is the flower texture that we made. Looks like I forgot to name it. It's being used by 16 other objects at the moment, but if I click this, it'll make it a unique texture. So that will mean, if I don't click this, I'll show you what happens. At the moment, if I change the hue here, it'll change all of them, except for this one, because I've just said it's now its own unique texture. Okay, so what I could do, I guess, is I could make the saturation lower, like 6, might make that look a little bit less alive. We could probably, I don't know, even drop it down a bit. That might make it look a bit more dead. And then if I want it to fall, if I want to animate it down, all I need to do is, I can do this from my animation tab or anywhere where I've got the timeline. Basically, if I choose a moment in my animation, like let's say frame 250, then I can press N and I can add a keyframe on its location and yeah, maybe even its rotation. The other thing I'm going to do is I want its center to be in the center of the flower, because if I want to do any rotation at the moment, it's going to rotate around its base, which, let's say it was falling and turning, we don't want it to rotate around there. We'll probably rotate around the middle. So I'll say, did I apply? I'll apply these modifiers too. I forgot to do that. Let's just apply these. And then I will do object, set origin, origin to geometry. I'll reset that keyframe. And then what I can do, let's say I want my leaf to fall from here. Well, I've keyframed it there, and I'm just going to take a random guess at 100 keyframes, and I'm going to GZ, drag it down to somewhere like, it's going to be outside of my camera view, so I kind of put it anywhere. I'll insert another keyframe, and then maybe I might add some rotation. So if I rotate, I'm going to rotate about, I don't know, 180 degrees, keyframe that again. So now if I go back and I play from here, it's sort of falling and tumbling. And you probably need to play around. I'm just going to mute that sound. I'll come back to the sound later, but let's just turn all of this sound off. And delete that one. Okay, so you probably need to play around a little bit with, like, you know, what speed of falling looks good. If I play this, it's probably a little bit slower than it would fall in real life, but for the dramatic effect of a petal falling, it's not too bad. I could always make it spin more, you know, I could add a little bit more rotation to here, but that might be too much, but let's just see. Not bad. Maybe that, you know, because nothing ever falls completely flat. Like, I'll show you, if it falls completely flat, you know, if these are both 0 and 60, which is what it is on the first keyframe, it'll look really strange. It'll just go straight down like it's, you know, a brick or something like that. But it's a petal. It has air resistance. The air itself is going to push it and give it some kind of turbulent effects because it's light like a feather. So it's going to flop around as it falls. Okay, so that's how I did the petals. Some of them also, just to give a sense of time and history, I also just put some of them on the table. You know, it gives the impression that these flowers have been here for a little bit too long and they've started to die. You know, this one here too, I should probably also play with its shading a little bit. I'll make it a unique user by clicking that little number there. I'll make the saturation lower, 0.8, and maybe I'll make the value 0.8. It just looks a bit more dead, which is good because they're the petals that fall off. The alive ones don't fall off. Okay, that's too dark. I don't know. Maybe something like that. It just looks more like the type of petal that would fall off compared to the ones that are still on the flower. Okay, I think they're the main changes I made texturing. So let's get into lighting. Okay, so lighting, I'm going to link to some more video tutorials because it's a big topic and there's so many fantastic Blender lighting tutorials out there. I'm going to keep my one pretty simple, but I'll link this one in the description. This is from Blender Guru. It's a tutorial on lighting, and there's so many. And Blender Guru also has this great introductory lecture on lighting, which I'll link as well, to just sort of explain that, like, really one of the things that lighting does in our scene is it brings to life all of the hard work we've done in 3D modeling. Like, without the lights, you know, we just have a black screen. And I'll show you that because that's how we will start our lighting. So let me delete all of the lights I have so far. I've got one light here, which I'll delete. I'll go in rendered mode so you can see what's happening. If I delete that light, rendered mode, I'll delete that light. So it's a lot darker, and I'll delete this little light. It's a lot darker. And there's one tiny light left, which I accidentally left in the wrong collection, this spotlight here, and I'll delete that. So now I've got a completely black screen. Yours might not be black. It might be like, by default, it's probably something like this. And that's because Blender by default has a background color, which is giving off light at the level of that gray. So if I just turn that strength number to 0, now we'll have a completely dark screen. I'm just going to put one of my views here, so I can see what I'm doing. And then this is my camera view. I might actually add a new camera as well so we can start even more fresh. All right, so I'm just going to Shift A. I'll add a camera. Where are we? Camera. All right. So that camera has gone in where my 3D cursor is. It's just hanging around here. And I might just sort of use my orthographic views to line it up with my scene. Okay. the next thing we have to do is we have to be looking through this camera here, and I'll just switch into solid mode so we can see what we're doing. So at the moment we're looking through my old camera, which is here, so I might just call that old camera, and this one I'll call it new camera, right? And I'll drag that into just my lights and camera collection, and if I want to look through this camera, I just need to go this little hamburger menu here, view, cameras, set active object as camera. If you've got a numerical keypad, you can also press Command and then the 0 that's on the numpad. Okay, so now we're looking through this camera. We can see it's not very straight, it's crooked. I could even adjust the rotation here. That's on the y-axis, so if I set that to 0, now we've got a nice straight camera. And I could even make these numbers very clean, like 90 and 180. So that's almost like a sort of, you know, depending on the view you want, you might sometimes want a really exact view, but here, you know, I'll probably rotate it down a little bit, and we'll just start our lighting like this. Before you're thinking too much about your camera angles, we might just generically light our scene. All right, so I'm gonna start by just adding one type of light. I'll put this back into rendered mode. I'm going to add, Shift-A, a point light. So at the moment, it's kind of, I think it's inside an object. It looks like it's inside my sculpture because that's where I left my, my 3D cursor. So if I look from the front, I can just G for grab and I can bring it out. And you can see the point light, it's brighter when it's closer to things. So it's got fall off, like much like lights in the real world. So I can bring it a little bit further away. But if it's getting too dark, I can always go into this lighting tab here and increase the power. So we can have brightness determined by how close the camera is to something, but the risk is that we'll have things overexposed. Or we can move it further away and increase its power. So maybe I put this to 100 or something like that. So that's kind of nice. It almost feels like maybe there's a window and we're looking some lights coming in from outside, or maybe there's a lamp that's on or something like that. We can change the color of the light. If I make it blue, it's got some like, I don't know, like some nighttime neon light feel. Green just looks kind of weird, but if you soften the green, maybe it looks like kind of strange artificial light. If we go really red, it might look like a really strong sunset or something. But if I just go like a tiny bit red, it sort of looks like maybe a nice warm incandescent light globe or something like that. So maybe I'll do that. The problem is, at the moment, we can't see a lot of our forms. We're missing, you know, half of the vase, the entire back of the table, and we can't see anything inside the box. So usually we have more than one light. So this first light, I'm going to call it key light, and I'm also going to put it in my lights and camera collection. I'll put that soap dispenser, I forgot about that, should be probably in my, I don't know, it's not in the lights collection, that's for sure. Okay, I'd forgotten about that. Right, so let's add a second light. I can just grab my key light and hit Shift-D, and I can bring it over to this side. And what we're going to do with this light is going to be called the fill light, and it's going to be much, much softer. If I set it to 0, okay, now it's doing nothing. If I set it to like 10, we'll see that it starts to just cover some of the areas that were too dark, that were completely in shadow. So I can even make it less dark, less bright, and we'll see that we'll start to just be filling in some of those like full shadows and getting a little bit more kind of accuracy and reflection and that type of thing. So I'd probably, I don't know, yeah, 5 is probably okay. If you want, you can sometimes make this light a little bit cool if you want. That's too cool. Now, what we'd be getting close to here would be like a 3-point light setup. 3-point light is, you'll see it in cinema. If I just Google it here, it's a classic from like basically how to do lighting for photography and cinema, where you have your object and you have a key light, a fill light, and then this backlight, which will just give you some of the edges which might be otherwise hidden in shadow. There's, again, I'll link a complete tutorial for lighting theory and practice from, I think Blender Guru has a great one. I'm just going to go over some really quick setup things here. So that lighting kind of looks okay, but now to me it really depends on what my camera's doing and where am I going to be looking. So if I just go back to my old camera and view through there, what I had done with my camera was I'd actually had a few different moments. I'd had like this moment where if we look at my camera, I'd keyframed my camera and I'd made it little just so I sort of wasn't getting too blocked by things. The view should be similar. And I hid my camera in between the flowers, so it's looking at the sculpture. And then I looked inside the mechanism, and then I looked from down here across the table, and that allowed me to see, well, now we've got two petals falling because we just animated another one. That allowed us to see these petals falling. But the lighting at the moment doesn't quite look right. Everything's still a bit too dark, especially here. So now that we know where the camera is going to be looking, well, actually, let me just show you how I animated the camera. That's probably useful. So I'm just going to quickly switch topic and talk about the camera animation, and then we'll fix up the lighting. Okay, so I'll just go back into solid view here, and I want to be viewing my extras because there's a few little objects that I've been using to help me. Okay, so first of all, excuse me. So first of all, if we look at this camera here, my old camera, I've got these two extra objects, camera aim and camera focus. So let's look at camera aim. Camera aim can be quite handy. If I move this object, it's going to move where my camera is looking. And this can be really useful. For example, imagine if I wanted, I'll just quickly animate this so you can see what I'm talking about. If I wanted my camera to move from here to here, but to stay looking at the same thing, I'll just quickly delete these keyframes. I'll have to remember to bring them back. So if I've got my camera here and I've keyframed the first position, and let's say I want my camera on the next move, let's just see, I've got this ticked, camera to view. Camera to view means I can sort of move my view here and it will actually move the camera. So say I want the next view to come around like this, and then I keyframe this at frame 200. Well, what I'll have now is my camera, it's still going to stay looking at the sculpture. Whereas if I don't have that, the view of the camera is going to be a bit strange. And the way that I've got my camera looking at this aim, I'll show you how to set that up. I'm just going to undo that little keyframe thing so I get my old keyframes back, right? The way to set that up is if we've got our camera here, we can use what's called a constraint. The old camera, a constraint. And a constraint, we can do lots of useful things, like let's say you want an object to travel along a curve. You can use like a clamp to constraint or something like that, or a follow path constraint. And you could have a curve and you could have objects like, I don't know, a roller coaster going along a track or a camera following a path. You can use these sort of follow path type of constraints, but here we're using a track to constraint, and track to basically means that the camera will always look at whatever we put here. And so I put in this empty, if you remember how to add an empty, Shift A, add an empty. So I added an empty and I called it camera aim, and that's, where's my camera aim? Camera aim is, where's my camera aim? Okay, oh, it's in the same position as my focus. Camera aim is here, and so now my camera will just follow it. The other thing I added is camera focus. So, what is camera focus? Camera focus, if we go into rendered view, see how most, I'm just going to turn off my viewport overlays, most of my flowers are all out of focus, but my sculpture is in focus. So if we go into the camera settings, that's what's called depth of field. Depth of field, if I turn this off, now we can see that everything is sharp and in focus. The lighting is still a bit dodgy, some things are too dark, but everything's in focus. Now, can I get my depth of field here? Yes, okay, so we can see it a little bit more easily in my material preview mode. Depth of field is basically how optical cameras work. We have a relationship between the aperture of a lens and the length of the lens, you know, how zoomed in are we, and how big is the hole that the light is coming through. And these relate to how we see the image and what is in focus. So if we have a large aperture, that means that we can only have basically like one part of the image be in focus. So that's what I've done. I've turned on depth of field, and this is where things get a little confusing if you haven't done photography. A small number in an f-stop actually means like a larger aperture, or the aperture is like the hole in the camera that the light comes through. So if I make this number larger, we'll see that we're not getting as much depth of field distortion. But if I make that number smaller, we're starting to get that kind of fuzziness that makes it look like a camera. See how both the background and the foreground are going out of focus, and the only thing in focus is the sculpture. And that's because in our depth of field, I've said focus on the object, and it's this other empty camera focus. And what's cool about that is that I can move that independently and make the camera focus on whatever I like. So for example, I could put that on my flowers, and my flowers go in focus. And that could be a cool shift. You know, you can animate that and have that move around, and it can just change the focus of what you're looking at. And that's what filmmakers do all the time. They change their focal point. So, you know, you could have an opening shot where only your flowers are in focus, and then we slowly focus on the sculpture, for example. So that's why I've got these two extra objects here. And what I do throughout is I've used keyframes to change the position of my camera. So I've got, for the first 100 frames, my camera is inside the flowers, and then in one keyframe, I switch, and now I'm looking at my cogs. If I had a larger gap there, then we'd have a movement that would be really quick. It'd be like a zoom in. But because I wanted a cut, I just had it move on one keyframe. Okay, you can also do things like you can set up different cameras and switch between the cameras, or you can just cut straight with your keyframes. Okay, so that was just a bit of a distraction when I was talking about lighting. And the reason that we're talking about lighting here is that depending on where our camera is looking, we might want our lighting to look a little bit different. We want the lighting to match the shot. So I'm going to just look at my key and my fill light here, because I feel it doesn't look as good as when I had things set up before. So let me just see, what have I done differently? Perhaps if I bring my key light out a little bit, and I might just make it a little bit brighter. Let's make it like 200. Okay, and my fill light, I might do the same. 15. I think that blue is a little bit too much. Okay. Actually, I think I preferred it the way it was. Now I remember what I did. Because I want that background to be dark, because I don't want us to really notice the fact that my floorboards don't look really good. So I might actually leave these the way I had them, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little extra light on my sculpture. I forgot I had that extra spotlight. Okay, I'm just going to look at this from the front and see how my lighting looks. Just dropping my light down a little bit. Something like that's okay. Yep, all right. So now I had an extra spotlight on my sculpture. That's what I'd forgotten about. Okay, so if I just go to my sculpture and I'm just going to view frame selected, I'm going to go shift and add my 3D cursor there, and I'm going to add one little extra light, which would be a spotlight. So if I grab that up, now my sculpture is really bright, way too bright. I'm going to scale it down. Now this, it doesn't really change the light, it just changes how I can view its handles in space. But I'm just going to rotate that, and I really just want it to kind of pick up the sculpture. Other things I can do, see how the spotlight, much like a regular spotlight, it has this halo. We should be able to soften that halo with the blend. So if I turn that down, it'll be a softer boundary, which is good, because we might not want it to look like there's actually a little spotlight there. I just want to have a little bit more attention on the sculpture. Maybe something like that. Because now I've still got that cool kind of dark, blurry space, and I've got the spotlight, just saying, okay, the thing we're looking at here is the sculpture. I'm going to make that a tiny little bit orange, and I'm just going to go back to my old camera, and I'm going to lower my aperture back to where I had it before, because I want even the table to be blurry. So in this first scene, I just want to look at the sculpture, and I almost want to ignore everything else. Okay, but now when we cut to here, we can see that we're not seeing the camera mechanism very well. So that I want to fix as well. I can either add a little light there, or I might be able to fix it up with maybe I can just adjust my key light a little bit. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Okay, that's better, because I just want to get that little angle so that we're seeing the mechanism move. Okay, so that looks better, and let's just check it looks good in the first shot. I think it looks fine. I like this little bit of abstraction, this blurry flower. We can't even see that it's a flower yet. That's cool. And then, okay, that looks good. And then, yeah, I think that'll look fine for lighting. Again, I'm going to link to a tutorial that that you can look at to take this further. You know, there's no need for us to make our own very long Blender lighting tutorial. There's so many great resources already available. Okay, so let's imagine that, you know, our lighting, it looks pretty good in our viewport, but where, you know, it's not really the ideal place to check. What we want to do is actually render a frame and just check that it looks as good as it should. So I can just render an image here. So there's an image, and we can say, okay, well, is the key light bright enough, or should it be a bit brighter? What we can do, see this thing here that says slot 2? I guess I'd left it on slot 2 instead of slot 1. But we can make multiple render images and we can compare them. And this to me is really where we get our lighting correct. So I can go into slot 3, and I recommend just making one change at a time. So let's say we go to our key light and we make it just a tiny bit brighter. Like it's at, I was keyframing it before. I'm just going to remove the keyframe because that will just confuse us. So let's say it's at 100. What if I put it to like 120? So things are a little bit brighter. So I can render that image into slot 3. And now I've got two images. And I believe if I press J, or is it Alt J? Let me check, Alt J. Yes, I can toggle between them. And we can actually see which one we think looks better. And I think with that little bit of extra light, it looks better. We're not getting too overexposed yet. We've got these little flashes here, but it looks okay. So we can go even brighter. Let's try, I'll go into slot 4, and let's jack it up to like 150. And let's render that, render image. Okay, so now if I press Alt J, you'll see the number up the top here telling us which slot we're in. And I think that 150 is a little bit too high and the 100 is too low. So we could say, okay, then maybe that 120 looked the best. And you can do lots of different small changes here until things look right. Like other things you notice in a render, maybe I need to put a small bevel on my box here. It's a little bit too sharp. So I could go into my box and if I've got all of my scale applied, I could put a okay, I've got our Boolean object here, and I could put a bevel, and we'd have to have a very small bevel, like 0.001. That's still too big, still too rounded, so we can put in another 0. Yeah, maybe something like that. It's just, I might make it like that, might make that a 2. There we go. And it's just rounded it off, and it'll just look a little bit more natural. And as we said in the previous tutorial, I can copy that onto all of my other pieces of wood. If I hold down Shift and select them, and then select the one last that has the correct modifier, hit Control L and link copy modifiers, then we should have a nicer bevel there. And let's see how it looks. So let's go into slot 5 and let's see if it's made a difference. One of the issues, one of the things we often do is we think a change that we've done has made a difference, but until we test it, we can't see it. So let's go from slot 5 to slot 4, and it looks much better because now we're seeing where the little joins click in because we've got little bevels around everything. It looks much, much better. It looks more realistic. So again, definitely test your renders and test one change at a time, by rendering one frame, and then we'll move on to rendering the video itself. The last thing I'm going to talk about before we render this out to an animation is I made two changes with the little mechanism. If I press play, you're going to hear a ticking sound, and the animation, it's now like it moves sort of with the ticking sound. Let's listen. Whoop. Okay, I muted the ticking sound, didn't I? Of course. Let's just turn that on, and then I'll explain how I did this. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, so you'll notice that the type of animation is different. Before, it used to just move smoothly round and around in a circle. Now it's doing this like ticky-tocky motion. And I just thought it looked more interesting, and it meant I could put this ticking sound with it. Okay, so how to animate this one. If I go into my keyframes, you can see that I don't have a keyframe for every single rotation, because that would drive me crazy, right? There's 20 teeth on the gear. I'd have to have a keyframe for every rotation. No, thank you. Instead, I've got one keyframe and I've looped it. Okay, so how did we do this? I'm going to go into something that we haven't looked at yet, which is the graph editor. So the graph editor also shows our keyframes, but it shows the interpolation. You might remember that earlier on we had done our rotation with linear interpolation. And what that means is it's a smooth transition between every keyframe. So you can see now that this one's linear, it's too smooth, and in fact it looks exactly like our old keyframe. And this one that has our, I'm just gonna, might turn that sound down because it's starting to annoy me again. This one that has our Bezier interpolation, we see that stop and start of the keyframe, and that's what I wanted. So what I did is basically I picked an interval. I think I made put it on keyframe 23, and I think I did that because I wanted to get a full 360-degree rotation, but it took a little bit of playing around. But I put my keyframe on 23, and then I rotated my gear by 18 degrees. And the reason I did it by 18 degrees is if we go 360 divided by 20, as in 20 teeth, we get 18. So 18 should be the rotation from one gear tooth to the next. So I just did that one keyframe, and then I set my interpolation to Bezier so that it speeds up and slows down, so it's not totally smooth. So we're going to see the ticking. And then the next thing I did is in the graph editor, yours might look like this, but if you open it up and then you select the keyframe where you've put your animation, the channel, which in this case is the Z rotation, we can add modifiers. So if I go into the modifier menu, you can see I've added this thing called cycle, which just means it repeats. So if I take that off, you'll just see there's one tick. So it'll go tick, and then it stops doing anything. So we want that rotation to happen all the time, every, whatever it is, 23 frames. So I just, with that Z Euler rotation selected in my graph editor, I just go add modifier, cycles, and here, that's not quite right. It's just doing the same one over and over again. And it might look the same, but it's actually not. It's just that the one rotation from here to here looks the same. It should actually be inheriting that rotation every time. If I have a look at this one, you'll see it a little bit more easily. If I just say no, repeat motion. Okay, so this, if we have this on our sculpture, you'll see it's just doing the same little rotation every time. It's not turning around. So if I put this repeat with offset, it's going to say, okay, every time I repeat, I do the same thing, but I start from the finishing point. So now, if we see the sculpture, it's adding that rotation to all of the previous ones. The reason we can't see this is because it's got the exact axis of symmetry that we're trying to rotate. You know, every 18 degrees, this thing looks the same. So we can't see the difference, but the difference is there. So I'm going to put this to repeat with offset. So basically, I've got a keyframe. I'm rotating 18 degrees every 23 frames, and I've got this cycles thing to make it go all the way around. And I've just added the exact same one with the same modifier to whatever we had before. So in case this was rotating on the x-axis, negative 360 degrees. This one was rotating also on the x-axis, negative 360, and then the sculpture was rotating on the z-axis. And then the only thing I did, because I wanted my animation to loop, I tried to finish it where the sculpture has gone a full turn. Yeah, so that's the change I made in animation to get that cool little like ticking thing, was using keyframe modifiers in the graph editor. And the other thing I did, I just grabbed some free sound I just Googled free sound effects, and I found this cool website from the BBC of recordings of clocks. And they've got so many, check it out. So, there's clocks, you can find sound effects of all sorts of things online. It's always a nice idea to say where you got the sound from in your credits. So I downloaded this, and then if you want to animate with sound, you can put it in your timeline if you go into the video editing tab. This is where we're going to compile our video later. I just I went Shift A and I added sound, and then I just navigated to my file and I brought it in. And if I untick that, there's my sound. The only other thing, if you're animating with sound like this, you want to make sure that your playback is synced to the audio. So what I mean by that is, let's say say your computer's not very fast, or say your animation is quite complicated. If we play every frame, sometimes our computer won't be able to play all of the 24 frames per second, so it will slow down the frame rate. But we can say, okay, let's change it up. If you can't play 24 frames per second, you can drop some frames, which just means ignore the frame and keep the frame rate, so keep the speed correct. So I had that just so that my audio kind of stayed in sync. Okay, now what else have we missed? We've done our lights. We've looked at animating the camera and using aim. So I guess to point out the obvious, when I animated my camera, if I look at my camera here and I look at its keyframes, let's go back to the dope sheet so we can just see the keyframes. I've got a few different camera positions. I've got a position here, and then I repeat that keyframe here. So the keyframe at frame 1 and frame 100 are the same. So it just says stay in that position. Then at frame 101, I jump to a new position and I stay there. And then at frame 85, I jump to another position again. And then I just adjusted my camera aim and my camera focus until the camera was looking where I wanted to. So in this case, my camera aim, I just moved it around until the camera was looking where I wanted it to. And then I think I did a trick with my camera focus where I animated its position so that here we're focusing on the sculpture, but then slowly we shift our focus to the vase. And you can see the aim object on the left-hand panel here, you can see it moving. And if you look on the right-hand panel, you can see that the sculpture becomes blurry and the vase becomes clear. And then I think the last thing I did is I dimmed my lights. So here, okay, I deleted my lights. Okay, so let's redim them. That's easy. So what we can do is, let's say, I don't know, maybe as that petal falls, I want my lights to get darker. So I can go to my fill light, and I can keyframe basically pretty much any parameter in Blender you can keyframe. It's really handy. So if I look at my key light, I'm going to put a keyframe on the power here, and then, I don't know, maybe a keyframe here, and then I'll just set this one to 0, re-keyframe it, and now if I scrub on my timeline from here to here, that light is getting darker. Cool. I could do it to all of the lights and have it get completely dark. It's actually kind of nice, like just seeing, I just want to, so if I haven't discussed this already, if I turn off lock camera to view, I can zoom in on just what my camera is going to look like. But if I lock the camera to view, it's actually going to move the camera. And you can just decide which one suits you depending on what you're doing. But you know, that's a kind of a nice lighting effect. Like look at how the books become quite abstract. It's got a kind of a vibe to it. So in my previous video I rendered, I dropped all the lights down, but that also looks kind of nice. I like that strangeness in the end. If I wanted to go from here to dark, I guess I could make my animation a little bit longer, change my frame end here, and then perhaps from here, maybe from frame 450, I could go to my fill light, keyframe it, and put that all the way to dark, and do the same thing with that little spotlight, which I accidentally left in my architecture collection. I'll pop it up here. Okay, so let's look at the fill light. We'll do them at the same time. So I started at frame 450. If you want to jump between the frames, just the arrow keys up and down will jump between frames. So I've jumped to frame 450, and I'm going to keyframe this spotlight. And at 550, I think is where I finished the dimming effect with the fill light. On the spotlight also, I'll just turn that to 0, insert a keyframe. So now I guess it'll go like, we'll change our focus, the main light will get dark, and then we'll have this moment that looks kind of nice, and then everything else will go, ooh, well, why didn't it go dark? Okay, what did we miss? Something didn't go dark. And it looks like my cycles have run out here, so I probably needed to, let's just really quickly fix that. Go into my graph editor and just add more numbers here so it doesn't, so you know when that's low, our cycles will finish there. I can just make it larger. But what was going on with my lights? What did I miss? Why is it not totally dark here? We've got our fill light, which has gone to 0, our key light, which has gone to 0, and our spot, I must have forgot to press the keyframe. Okay, so let's go back to frame 550, set that to 0, and hit keyframe. Okay, now it's dark. Okay, so let's try again. And everything goes dark. Okay, and it looks like my sound file is not quite long enough, but you get the point. Okay, so let's say that that's our finished animation. And again, I want you to really have some fun with this and make it into something interesting. Again, hopefully based on a shelf in your house and objects that have meaning to you. Okay, so to animate and export this, one thing we won't do, we could technically just set our export straight to, this is our output menu. I could set the file format straight to a video, but we don't want to do that. The reason we don't want to do that is we're going to lose a lot of data, and we're going to have compression, but also if anything goes wrong, it's kind of a one-shot hope. It's like it might get halfway through the render, and if something crashes, we've lost our video file. What we actually do is we render to images first. So usually to JPEG or PNG. What I will do is I'll set a folder, and I've already done this once before, but I'll make another one, and I'll call it frames_2, and I'll select it. And what we're going to do is with that set there and that set there, we don't need RGB alpha because we don't have any transparent backgrounds, but if you're rendering something where you don't want a background, then you might use the alpha channel. What we're going to do is hit render animation. And what that's going to do is it's going to render every single frame. And if we go into our Finder, we will see that in our frames folder, we're starting to get all of these frames. And at the moment, my frames look like they're taking a few seconds. Blender will tell me each frame is taking about 2 seconds. So this might take a few minutes to render out the whole animation. Once it's done, I'm just going to skip ahead and use my previous one, so I can cancel my render by just pressing escape. Once it's done, we need to compile these into a video. The best way to do that, I'm going to save where I'm up to, is to create a new file, and you can call it video editing. I've actually, oh yeah, I'll do this now with you. video editing, and then you'll get something like this. And this is quite cool. This is where Blender functions as a video editing tool. So if you need to do basic video editing, you can do it straight in Blender. So this is your timeline and this is your canvas. So we need to add our frames. So I'll click Shift A and we'll add an image or image sequence, and we'll go into find our folder, our frames. I'll press A to select all, add the image strip, and I'll need to make my scene the same length as my frames, which I think was, what was it, like 600, 700, something like that. No, what was it? If I just move here, okay, I'm guessing it was 500. Okay. Okay, cool, 500 frames. Okay, so then if we wanted to add sound, we can also just add our sound underneath here. So if I find my sound, I can go Shift A, add sound, and I can look in the folder where I put my sound, which is in my project folder. So I've got my 3D fundamentals and my audio, and I had to change it. I played around with the speed of my audio quite a lot until I kind of liked it. I changed the speed in another piece of software called Audacity, which is also free. And then I think I just lined it up. I had some issues with syncing, so I just want to check that I've got my ticks on my sound lined up with my animation. If everything's done correctly when you're animating, you should be able to just bring the same file in, but I think I made a little error before, so I'm just going to quickly line it up. So I'm going to look for every moment when the sculpture pauses, and I'm just going to press the letter M and just make some little marks. Tick, tick, something like that. So there's 2 ticks, and I'm just going to line, I think we're something like this. It's not quite right, hold on. Look at this again. Tick, tick. Tick, tick, okay. Okay, so this is really sort of not super important here, but basically I'm just like resyncing my sound. Once we've got everything the way we want it, we can also do things like, say I want to fade my sound in, I can press K and I can cut it. I can press X, delete it. I can right click and I can fade in, so the sound fades in, like that. I could do the same thing at the end. I could cut my sound, K for cut, delete that, right click and I could fade out. I could also fade my animation out, even though it already goes to black, but just in case it didn't. Now here it's fading out, there's nothing underneath it, so I could add Shift A, add a color, that'll just be pure black by default, and I could stretch that out. Oops, I just need to grab the side handle of it here. I can stretch that out, make it the whole length. I could change its color, I could make it green or something underneath, but we want to fade out to black, so I'll just make sure that's black. Then if I add on another, I don't know, 100 frames, I could add some text, and I could say Shift A, add text, GY, bring that up, and I could say this is, let's give it a name, Tick by Peter, and then I could make another one, duplicate that down, and I could move it down on the Y and say with sound from the BBC, or I could be more specific and say sound from BBC Rewind. Depending on where you get your sound from, sometimes they ask you how they want you to accredit it, but I'm just putting this here as an example. Okay, and I could even go even further and say 2025 and put that in between. Another thing you can do, we can go a lot further with Blender Video Editor, but say I've got all the text where I like it. In case I don't want to move all of them, I can select all of these, right click and say, where is it? Make meta strip, and so that's made that all one strip. So now I can move the whole, move the whole thing on my screen. So just so you know that I'm not moving the background, I can move this and it's just moving my text. So yeah, that's kind of, I find Blender Video Editor pretty handy for basic video editing. The controls are nice and simple. So once I've got all of this done, there's my animation compiled into a video. I just need to export it one more time. So now in the export menu, I make sure that my file format is no longer PNG, it's FMPEG video. I would select where I want it to export. I've made a folder called video, and I would just put it in that folder. And you can also check the encoding. MP4 I think is great for online use. And we can make sure we've got audio. ACC, MP3, both fine. And then we would just hit render and render animation again, and this will be very fast because we're not recalculating all the 3D information again. We're just putting 2D frames into a video file. So it's pretty quick. Okay, so that's the end for this tutorial. I'm sure there'll be some more questions, but hopefully this is enough to get you all started with the basic idea of cameras, lighting, and rendering. Okay, bye-bye.